The county is brown to the horizon. Every giant sprinkler circle, every field of corn, cooked and dead under a sky that has not given rain in 3 summers. And right in the middle of all that ruin sits one bright green square. 3 acres. Alive. At the edge of it stands a thin girl in a dusty jacket, her grandfather's worn notebook in one hand, a stack of rusty old pipe behind her. The same pipe the whole county threw out as scrap. The same pipe they laughed at her for hauling home, load after load, for a whole year, while they called her the girl who collects junk. Then the worst drought anyone could remember settled in. The state and the water district capped everyone's wells, and the pumping stopped. The big farms burned. Hers did not. How a pile of ruined pipe outlasted every modern irrigator for miles is only the beginning.
What follows is a chain of turns, each one harder to believe than the last. 2 failures that nearly broke her. A stranger who showed up at the fence. A morning the men who mocked her went silent. And the part that changes how you see all of it waits at the very end. To understand how 3 acres stayed green when a whole county died, you have to go back to a farm that was already failing. Consider what happens to a single drop of water in western Kansas in July. A giant center pivot flings it high into the air, out across a 1/4 mile of corn, and the hot wind takes its cut before the drop ever lands. Spray into 100 degrees and a steady gust, and near 1/3 of what leaves the well never reaches a root at all. Sprinklers put somewhere around 65 to 75 parts in 100 of their water to real use. The rest feeds the sky. Now think of a garden hose laid flat on the ground, punched with tiny holes, buried under a thick blanket of straw.
No arc, no mist, no wind to rob it. The water seeps out slow, right at the crown of the plant, down where the roots wait. Under mulch, the sun never touches the wet soil, so almost nothing steams off. Drip lines like these deliver close to 90 parts in 100 where they are aimed. Same crop, half the water, sometimes less. That is the whole trick, and it is older than any pump. Water wants to travel down, always down, the way a marble rolls to the low corner of a table. Set a pond up on a rise, run a pipe out of the bottom of it, and gravity does the work for free. No diesel, no deep well, no electric bill climbing with the heat. A drop of 2 or 3 feet of elevation gives a drip line all the pressure it ever needs, which is barely more than the weight of the water itself pressing on the hole. The center pivot is a fire hose fighting the weather every hour it runs. The buried drip line is a slow drink handed straight to the roots while the ground overhead stays shaded and cool. One leans on a falling aquifer and a running motor. The other leans on rain caught in a hole in the earth and the plain pull of the ground. And somewhere, out under 3 acres of straw, tiny holes in a rusted length of cast-off pipe let the water bead, gather, and slip quietly down into the dark. Go back to the spring of 2019, to a kitchen table in Sublette, the little town at the heart of Haskell County, Kansas. If you have ever been handed a broken thing and told it was worthless, stay with this girl to the end. Subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. That spring, Sam Callahan still farmed the home place, 40 acres of light sandy ground his father Eli had worked for 53 years. Sam ran one old well and a tired pivot that limped in circles over the wheat. He was not a big man in the county. Dale Pruitt farmed 1,000 acres to the north, and never let him forget it. Then came the winter Wren turned 17. Sam went out before dawn to break ice on the stock tank, and his heart quit him in the cold. They buried him 3 days later. The ground was frozen so hard the men took turns on the shovels. After the funeral, Ruth Callahan sat at that same table with a letter from the bank in her hand. She read it twice, folded it small, and slid it under the sugar bowl where her daughter would not see. "Pruitt made an offer," she said, not looking up. "Take it and the note clears. We walk away with something." Wren said nothing. She had already crossed the yard to the shed, to the low shelf where her grandfather kept his things. Wrapped in an old feed sack sat Eli's notebook, its cover soft as cloth. 53 years of rain totals, soil moisture, wind days. Every dry summer the old man had outlasted on that same sandy ground.
On the first page, in pencil worn nearly to nothing, one line. Water goes where you send it, not where you throw it. She turned to a middle page. There, Eli had sketched a small pond set up on a rise, and a line running out of the bottom of it, downhill, feeding a grid of thin pipe. She read the page twice, standing in the cold, her breath white in the shed. Then she pulled the pencil stub from the spine, found the first clean page at the back, and began to write. Every farm auction in Haskell County that summer ended the same way. Someone drove a loader up to a heap of dull aluminum, pushed it to the side of the lot, and tagged it scrap. Gated pipe, hand line, wheel line couplers, a generation of irrigation nobody wanted anymore. The county had gone all in on pivots, those quarter-mile arms that walked themselves in slow circles, and the old ground pipe was worth more melted down than laid out. Wren was the only one bidding on it. She backed her father's flatbed to the pile at Sublette, at Satanta, at every sale in between, and loaded pipe by hand in the July heat until her palms went black with grease and oxidation. 30-foot lengths of gated pipe, the kind with little sliding doors along one side that let water out row by row. Aluminum hand line, light enough to carry 2 joints at a time. She paid pennies on the pound and drove home slow, the load rattling behind her. Word traveled the way it does in a small county. At the co-op counter, manager Cal Rooney told it to anyone waiting on parts. "The Callahan girl's out buying everybody's junk pipe again," he said, and the men laughed into their coffee. Dale Pruitt put it plainer at the elevator. "She's stacking scrap like it's gold. Her daddy'd be proud." He did not mean it kind. Wren answered none of them. She laid the pipe in long rows behind the barn, sorted by size, and logged every load in the back of Eli's notebook. Date, length, condition, what it cost. Some evenings her mother watched from the porch and said only that the yard was starting to look like the county dump out on the blacktop. Nobody asked what a 19-year-old wanted with pipe the whole county had thrown away. If they had, she might have turned to a penciled page 50 years old. She kept hauling instead, load after load, right up to the first hard frost. By the time the shelter belts turned gold, she had gathered better than 11,000 feet of it. The entire system, every joint she would ever put in the ground, had cost her $40. Picture a rain barrel set under the corner of a barn roof. It costs nothing to keep full. Every storm that crosses the high plains tops it off again, free, for as long as the sky keeps turning. Now picture a straw dropped down a narrow shaft into a jar of water buried so deep it took the last ice age to fill it. Draw on that straw all summer, and the level only drops. No rain reaches that far down in a lifetime, or in 10,000 of them. The Ogallala under western Kansas is that buried jar. It is old water, laid down long before any plow turned, and once a pump lifts it out, it does not come back. Every giant well in the county sips from the same slow emptying jar, and the straws grow longer year by year. A catchment pond is the rain barrel, only shaped like a shallow bowl scooped into the low corner of a field.
Line the bottom with packed clay so the water cannot slip away into sandy ground, and it becomes a bucket the size of a house lot. Two things keep it filled. The first is plain rain, caught where it falls instead of running off to the county ditch. The second is tailwater, the runoff that trickles down the slope of a field after a storm, water most farms let drain away for good. Send that to the low corner, and it waits there on the surface, ready. Water sitting in a bowl on the ground answers only to the weather.
When it rains, it refills.
When the district shuts the wells down for the season, it does not care. Then there is the matter of how much you spend. Give a thirsty crop everything it asks for, and a small pond empties by August. Give it a little less than it wants, timed to the handful of days that decide the harvest, and the same held water stretches across far more rows. Farmers call that deficit irrigation, and it is closer to rationing a canteen than to opening a tap. So the question hiding under the straw was never how much water sat beneath the county. It was simpler and colder than that. When the deep jar finally runs dry, who has been quietly filling a bowl of their own, straight out of the sky? The first water she ran through the buried lines lasted 9 days before it quit. Wren walked the rows that morning and found the emitters gasping, half of them dead, the mulch above them dry as ash. She dug one up with her fingers.
The little opening was packed solid with fine tan silt off the field. The same dust the wind carried all summer, sucked in through the pond intake and driven down every joint until the flow choked itself. She wrote the failure in Eli's notebook the way she wrote everything, plainly, with the date. Then the sky did the rest. A July cell dumped 2 inches in 40 minutes, more than the packed clay berm on the low side of the pond had ever been asked to hold, and the wall let go. The catchment emptied down the section line in a brown tongue, carrying half a season of caught rain into the county ditch while she stood in the runoff and watched it go. Word of that reached the co-op too. But so did something else. An old man drove out the next week in a truck older than she was, parked at the gate, and did not laugh. Harlan Voss had run ditches and headgates for the groundwater district for 31 years before his knees quit. He walked the pond, towed the broken berm, and crouched a long time over a dug emitter.
"You built it upside down," he said at last, not unkind. "Water this dirty wants a sand filter and a settling basin before it ever touches your lines. And a berm's got to have a spillway, girl, or the storm makes its own." He drew both in the dirt with a stick. They fixed it through August, the two of them. A screened settling pond first, so the silt dropped out and sank before the water moved on. A gravel and sand bed after that, catching what was left. A cut spillway armored with the very pipe she had hauled, so the next flood ran off harmless instead of tearing the wall down. The last afternoon, Harlan flushed a line clean and stood back. Clear water beaded at every emitter down the row, one bright drop after another, sinking into the dark mulch without a sound, while the old man watched and said nothing at all. By the following June, the sky over Haskell County had gone the color of old tin and stayed there. No thunderheads built in the afternoons. The wheat came up thin and headed out short, and by the 4th of July, the dryland corn had rolled its leaves into tight gray spears that rattled when the wind crossed them. Ranchers hauled water to cattle in stock trailers. The talk at the co-op stopped being about prices and turned to years, whether this one would break the way 1956 had, or settle in and stay. Then the letters came. The groundwater district, the same one Harlan Voss had run headgates for, sat down with the state and did the arithmetic nobody wanted to do. The aquifer had dropped better than 2 feet under the county in a single season,
the fastest fall on the district's books, and the deep wells were pulling sand. In August, the board voted emergency allocations. Every irrigation permit was cut to a fraction of its number. And the biggest pumps, the ones feeding the quarter-mile pivots, were capped first. Dale Pruitt farmed better than 2,000 acres of it, all of it under those slow-walking arms. When the district man drove out and locked the meter on his lead well, Pruitt stood in the yard and read the notice twice. His corn was chest-high and just tasseling, the exact 10 days when a crop decides whether there will be ears at all. Cut off through those 10 days, the field was already lost, and he knew it standing there. Up and down the section lines, the pivots quit where they were, arms frozen at odd angles like posts left standing after a flood. The corn under them cured on the stalk inside a week. From the blacktop, a man could watch a green quarter section go the color of straw, row by row, until the whole county looked set down too close to a fire. On her 3 acres, the catchment pond that Harlan had helped her wall and screen sat a third full of spring rain, going nowhere the wind could take it. Wren walked the plots at first light with Eli's notebook open against her knee and ran the district's arithmetic backward. She counted the days to harvest, measured what the pond held, and figured how thin she could stretch it. Then she knelt at the head of the first line, laid her hand on the gate valve, and began turning every plot down to the barest ration the roots could live on. The Saturday market on the square in Sublette opened at 7, and by 9:30, Wren Callahan's tables were bare boards. Tomatoes, sweet corn, peppers, beans, all of it gone, while the rest of the county hauled in nothing but dust. Folks lined up too deep at her stall, because hers was the only stand still bringing food out of Haskell County ground, and everyone in the line knew why. 3 acres of hers stayed green. Everything around them had gone the color of a paper sack. By the middle of that second dry summer, they started coming out to the fence to look, the ones who had laughed loudest at the auctions. Dale Pruitt came first, the man who farmed better than 2,000 acres and had watched his pivots freeze at odd angles the day the district capped his wells. He stood at her wire a long while, hat on, staring down the mulched rows where the cast-off aluminum ran clear water bead by bead into dark soil. Then he took the hat off and held it against his chest, the way a man stands at a graveside. "You built all this," he said, "out of the pipe we threw away." $40 of it, Wren answered, and left it there. Cal Rooney drove out from the co-op that same week, the manager who had told the whole town the Callahan girl was hauling off everyone's junk. He came quiet this time, a notepad in his hand, and asked how a gravity line under mulch could carry a crop on less than half the water the pivots drank while the Ogallala fell 2 feet under their boots. She showed him the settling pond, the sand bed, the gate valves she had turned down to the barest ration the roots could stand. He wrote it all down. So did the men behind him. That fall, she pulled Eli's notebook from her coat and read them the line he had set on the first page the year she was born, in pencil that had never faded. "The man who catches the rain never begs the well." Here is what 3 green acres taught a county that laughed. The land does not reward the loudest pump or the deepest well. It rewards the one who watches, who writes it down, who keeps what the sky gives instead of chasing what the ground is running out of. If you have ever been handed something the world called worthless and made it carry you, tell us about it in the comments. And tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe, and we'll be back next week with another.